third measure of central tendency that we'll cover in our class is the mode. The mode of a data set is just the value that appeared the most often in the data set. In other words, the mode of a data set is just the most frequent value in the data set. It turns out that a data set can have no mode, one mode, or more than one mode. If each value appears the same number of times in a data set, then that data set has no mode. These are all examples of data sets with no mode. In this first data set, each value appears once. In the second data set, each value appears twice. In this third data set, each value appears twice. And in this fourth data set, each value appears 3 times. If one value appears more often than each of the other values, then the data set has one mode. These are all examples of data sets with one mode. In this first data set, 2 appears more often than 3, and 2 also appears more often than 4, so the mode is 2. 2 is the number that appears the most often in this data set. In the second data set, 8 appears more often than 5, so the mode is 8. In this third data set, 5 appears more often than 4, and 5 also appears more often than 3, 2, or 1, so the mode is 5. If 2 values appear equally often, and those 2 values also appear more often than each of the other values in the data, then the data has 2 modes. These are all examples of data sets with 2 modes. In this first data set, 2 and 3 appear the same number of times, and they both appear more often than 4, so the modes are 2 and 3. In the second data set, 2 and 3 appear the same number of times, and they both appear more often than 4 or 5, so the modes are 2 and 3. In the third data set, 4 and 5 appear equally often, and they both appear more often than 2, 3, 7, 8, or 9, so the 2 modes are 4 and 5. Basically, if 2 numbers are tied for first place, then those 2 numbers are both the mode of the data. Let's now go over a few important points about the mode. First, the mode can be found with any type of data, quantitative, ordinal, or nominal. That's because any type of data set can have a value that appears the most often. Second, the mode is usually somewhere in the center of the data. That's because the value that appears the most often is usually somewhere in the middle. It's usually not an extreme value down at the low end or an extreme value up at the high end. For example, when a certain class takes an exam, the mode of that class probably won't be a low number like 50 or a high number like 100. It'll probably be somewhere in the 70s or somewhere in the 80s. Third, unlike the mean, the mode is not affected by extreme values. That's because an extreme value down at the low end or an extreme value up at the high end has no effect on which value appears the most often in the data.